everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore, joined by Payton Nyquvest, CEO of Numinus. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. Are you one of the founders at Numinus as well?
I am, yeah.
Great. So we had you on. We actually got to record in person in Miami at Wonderland. That was awesome, but it was a short one. But I think we packed in a lot of information in like 20, 30 minutes there. So stoked to get you on for a full hour, dig more into your story, origin story of the company, and all that kind of fun stuff too.
Sure.
So Payton, you in our last interview, we talked a lot about you had some pretty serious chronic pain, and psychedelics helped. Can you tell us that story just one more time?
Yeah, sure. So, really sort of going back to birth, struggled with severe chronic pain, and grew up in a household that struggled with substance use disorder, and was sort of very, very fortunate to have my mom actually get sober when I was about 12 or 13, and at that point in time, sort of said, sorry about the last 12 or 13 years, but I think you should think about starting to work with somebody. And I think, because of how much I was suffering with my chronic pain as a young person, I really took that quite seriously. And not only that, but saw, my mother go through just a profound shift in her sobriety, but saw this possibility of someone, through shifting their mental health and mental state, could greatly become a better version of themselves. And so, in my sort of mid to late teens, became very, very passionate about mental health and my own mental health, and sort of the intersection of mental health, physical health, and the recognition that there's no you can't compartmentalize the two. They're all part of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really put me
Feels
on
very
a
Bruce Lipton.
yeah. Yeah, and so it really set me on this sort of trajectory through my life of continuing to explore really all of the accessible modalities in how we treat mental health and physical health. But what was happening for me in my chronic pain was that no matter what I was doing to try and address these issues, my chronic pain continued to get worse and worse and worse. And
Mm.
one of the things, and one of the things we recognize a lot in society is, there's almost this sort of downward spiral that you get into where you start to get diagnosed with things. For me, complex PTSD was a significant one for myself, and your identity almost wraps around that diagnosis. And then when you can't get relief from your symptoms, it becomes this very dark downward spiral that you get into. And so my chronic pain continued to get worse and worse and worse, and got me to a point where I was getting hospitalized, up to 3 times a week,
Oh
and
my
felt
God.
really out of options. And unfortunately, when you end up in the hospital, that their way of treating you is, here's something to get rid of your pain as fast as humanly possible, without really looking at, like, why is this happening in the first place. And
Mm.
so I ended up turning to psychedelic therapy, really, as a last ditch. I had tried everything else. I had researched psychedelics for a long time. I'd actually never had a psychedelic experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, my pathway, I guess, was a little bit unique in terms of my first psychedelic experience was really one from a significant need and not a recreational standpoint. So,
Was there like a
um,
certain thing that came in and drew psychedelics and chronic pain together for you? Like, do you hear stories somewhere?
obviously, there's lots of anecdotal stories that I was hearing, and then I'm sort of a down the rabbit hole kind of person, and had done a significant amount of research,
Mm-hmm.
and the research was just extremely compelling, and really that's sort of what led me there. And again, this other feeling of, like, I've tried everything else. I
Yeah.
really don't. And not only that, but with how severe it was, there was a very significant part of me that was sort of looking at this as if something doesn't happen very, very quickly, that I'm running out of room. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's really what was the motivation for turning to psychedelics.
Right. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm.
It's it's so scary to think of how much pain so many people are in,
Mm.
and how there's no real great. I'm not going to say there's no real great options. The options are so limited, and the
Yeah.
durability of result is really low.
And I think it's so hard, when someone is showing up in the emergency room and they're in complete despair. Those states for me, the thought of taking my own life was almost a binary choice. It was, am I going to survive this, or should I end this? And it was almost a one or a zero kind of choice when you're in
Mm-hmm.
that kind of a state. And
Totally.
so you show up at the emergency room, and as emergency room physicians, they're there to try and to get you back to a place where you're not in the current state of suffering, right?
Yeah.
And so you look at opiates, and frankly for me, like, that was something that I was so grateful that I had so much education around addiction, because I could very, very clearly see how opiates would have been a very easy choice for me to make.
Mm-hmm.
Because at many, many times, the way that they would treat my pain was hook me up to an IV, get hydromorphine flowing, and the pain would stop. Almost, almost magically, for someone, when you're in that sort of deep state of suffering. So, but I think, and the thing that I was always begging for when I was in the emergency room was like, help me not get here again. What, like,
Please.
I appreciate you alleviating this pain that I'm in, but I don't want to be back. Like, I don't want to end up back here again. And there's a lot, it's limited, and it takes a lot of time, and working with a particular individual to figure out, and with things like complex PTSD, it's a lot of unweaving, and a lot of care that's needed in order to move through that.
Yeah. And what about the context of your experience? Was it kind of like a shamanic ayahuasca situation?
Yeah, so my first experiences was with ayahuasca, down in Costa Rica, and was at a place that was quite educated on trauma, and the sort of Western healthcare system as well. But since that experience, have sort of been through the gamut of psychedelic therapies now, and but
Mm-hmm.
that was my first experience. Yeah.
That's outstanding. Yeah.
Yeah.
And was it somewhat immediate? Did it take a few weeks to kick in?
Yeah, this is always the part of my story that I always want to preface with, these are not panaceas, and the psychedelic experience itself is literally just the first couple percent of the work that needs to be done after those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But I spent 1 week uh, with ayahuasca, and after that 1 week, I never had any chronic pain issues ever again. And
That's amazing.
it was incredibly profound. And also, I always say, like, the start of the next significant journey of work that was needing to be done, because
Mm-hmm.
once it's one thing to get there, and then once you've been there, it's a whole other thing to make sure that you're integrating those and making those changes into your life. And so it was profound, and life saving for me. But certainly has been something that's taken real dedication to commit to those shifts, and make sure that they're integrated and lasting.
Right.
Yeah.
And like we might for whatever reason I lean on, oh, he had chronic pain, but it's like CPSD is no joke.
Mm,
And like you say, unravel that, it's like a lot of work, massive amount of work. So
yeah.
yeah, it's a process and a
Hmm.
half.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so I'm glad you stuck it out. Because Numinus is doing some really cool things. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
so let's
Yeah.
get into like, when did was there a certain point where you were like, oh, I think there's room here for me to apply some professional skills and do
Hmm.
really cool work in psychedelics? Like, how did that unfold for you?
So, coming out of that experience that I had, just, and I think it was so much because I had done so much mental health work. It was like throwing, this scaffolding that I'd built. It was like throwing gas on a fire.
Hmm.
And so I came out of that, really, just trying to figure out how to give back to something that had saved my life. And, very quickly found myself having conversations with folks at Health Canada and MAPS and British Columbia Center on Substance Use and all of these conversations. And as I was trying to figure out, even from a philanthropic standpoint, like where can I wh- what can I offer that is going to make the most significant amount of impact? The thing I recognized that there was just a lot more than philanthropy that I could offer. And I was a young a young person who has some energy and resourcefulness to offer. And the thing that we're really recognizing in those early days was just, um, while all of this research that's happening is incredible, and at the time there was really only not-for-profit and academic groups sort of in the, still feels bizarre to call it an industry at times, but Compass was sort of just getting off at the ground, and that was about it. And so we really just through conversations with academia and not-for-profit groups said, what are the things that we can build that take some of the heavy lifting off of yourselves, and also help move this from research and into practice,
Hmm.
in an accessible way. And that's really, where it was sort of the thought for Numinus and the intention around Numinus was birthed from.
That's amazing. What was your professional background before that?
Yeah, so I have a finance and capital markets background. I usually tell people not to hold that against me. That's just how I ended up here. But I was very my sort of pathway through that was funding a lot of new industry, a lot of sort of startup funding, and very involved with management groups, getting companies off of the ground. And I also helped manage one of the larger independent offices in Vancouver, and I was a director of the Across Canada firm as well. But my passion was really around how, helping management teams not only get them funding, but help them get started and get off the ground, and a lot of new industry support as well.
That's great. That's great. All right, so natural fit really, to come into the space because, as we know, biotech takes a lot of resources. Um,
It
yeah.
does, yeah, it does.
Yeah. So let's talk about like the first. Or when was Numinous founded?
So almost 4 years ago, about 3.5 years ago now, and before that, quite a bit of ideating and whiteboarding of things, but about 3.5 years ago. Yeah.
That's outstanding. Cool. And obviously you had to build a really stellar team. So who? Well, I guess like before we go there, like what was the intention? It was just pulling up slack from nonprofit. So were you looking at like just projects that didn't really overlap or conflict with their work primarily?
Yeah, the two things we continue to hear from not-for-profit and academia was, the need for clinical infrastructure. From my experience and from the people who we engage with, who had quite a lot of experience in the space, the recognition that, um, the therapeutic container, and how this engages with the people who are looking for this work is going to be extremely important. So it was a lot of recognition that building that clinical practice and building that infrastructure was going to be extremely important. And then the other side was obviously what can we do to support and innovate on the tools side, which is the drugs. And work to be done on how can we continue to ensure safety, quality, accessibility, and also is there room for innovation on making them more amenable to therapy, and really, how can we ensure the best possible tools for the therapists who are working with these different medicines.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Cool. Um, so I don't know too many of the folks on your team. Like right now, I know you, and
Hmm. Hmm.
Dr. Devin Christie. Are there any other? Well, Devin Christie was on our show maybe almost a year ago with
Hmm.
Dr. Will Siu from Los Angeles, and they talked a
Hmm.
lot about chronic pain in that episode. And it really, I had to have a friend, Court Wing, actually tell, like, hey, you need to listen to this one because I didn't record it. It
Hmm.
was Kyle, and
Hmm.
he kept telling me over the course of a month and a half to listen. I finally listened. I was like, holy shit, there's like a lot of really incredible
Hmm.
things being speculated about here from who I consider top tier scientists. Like both
Yeah.
Will and Devin are unbelievable. And that's when I was like, wait a second. Okay, I think we need to really look at chronic pain. And, I think people are also catching on generally in the field that we need to start looking at non-psychiatric indications. But
Hmm.
chronic
Hmm.
pain is kind of one of these things like you were mentioning. It's like, can we disconnect it from the psychiatric side? Like, not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and I think in regards to chronic pain, you know, the reason for many people suffering with chronic pain is not just strictly a physical ailment. Um, the mind and the nervous system play a significant role in the body's experience, and so again, I think this real, and I think that's one of the things that psychedelics do that's so interesting is. Um, it's really looking at all of the parts and helping people move through that. I think that's, you see this real resurgence in things like somatic therapy and things like that couple very, very well with psychedelics in that therapeutic
it's
container.
an impact booster almost for these therapies that
Hmm.
are already pretty
Hmm.
good. But then, oh, look, they're all of a
Hmm.
sudden way better somehow. It's kind of interesting.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm hopeful for the future of psychedelics and massage just generally. Um, we'll
Hmm.
see. I have friends that refuse to get massages unless they're under the influence. It's quite interesting to me because they're like, that's the only way it works, is their
Hmm.
line.
Hmm. Interesting.
Fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah. Um, but I can't vouch for experience yet. Maybe someday. But yeah. So what's going on right now in Numinus? What are your top projects?
Yeah, so for us, continuing to build, the company really has two main focuses: Numinus Health, which is our clinical infrastructure, where we have multiple locations in Canada. We're certainly in the process of expanding into the United States, and really, we do a host of things out of those locations. We do quite a lot of just traditional mental health and traditional therapy work, which we really feel needs to be the basis and the backbone for all of this work. As I mentioned, the psychedelic experience is extremely important, but you also need to create a platform where people can continue to integrate, engage, and move through their sort of mental health journey and hopefully transition into more mental wellness and working on improving on their mental state of being, not just indication treating. And so that's really what the sort of backbone of our clinical infrastructure is based off of. We then obviously have started to do quite a bit of work around ketamine assisted psychotherapy, really continuing to focus on the therapeutic aspects. And obviously ketamine has seen a very strong surge in interest and a lot of operators in the space. And I think while that's really exciting, needs to be met with a level of intentionality and just I think a little sobering around what is ketamine used for, what is it effective for, what do we have good clinical data for, and how are those protocols being developed. So that's been a big part of the work. And then we also are able to carry out some research work there. We're the first industry collaborators with MAPS and their PTSD MDMA for PTSD work, which we are just in the process of gearing up to carry out in our location in Montreal and Vancouver. And then we have a clinical study with psilocybin as well, and have been developing psilocybin protocols to use our extraction in a phase 1 trial, which sort of brings us to the other focus of the company, which is Numinus Bioscience, which is our Health Canada licensed laboratory and production facility that has international licensing from Health Canada to allow us to not only do analytical testing, but also production, importation, and distribution of pretty much all the known psychedelic compounds. And Health Canada also amended that licensing about a year and a half ago to allow us to harvest, cultivate, extract, and produce a psilocybin product from naturally occurring psilocybin-containing fungi. And we grew from what we can tell. We're not totally sure, but from what we can tell, the first legal psilocybin mushrooms since the 70s, and we've been developing extracted psilocybin formulations to be able to meet all the standards of the FDA, DEA, and Health Canada, and start to use those in clinical studies. And then really to sort of highlight some obviously very exciting advancements in Canada is the change to the Special Access Drug Program, which has been an initiative that our group has been involved with for quite a long time. Dr. Evan Wood, our chief medical officer, is very, very experienced in drug policy change in Canada and internationally. And him and a number of others about a year and a half ago put forward a briefing note to Health Canada to change the Special Access Drug Program to include MDMA, psilocybin, and other psychedelics, which have been previously restricted from the Special Access Drug Program. And for anybody that's not aware, the Special Access Drug Program is a program in Canada that allows for unlimited amount of Canadians to get access to drugs or therapies that show clinical positive clinical data, which obviously we have quite a lot for MDMA and psilocybin.
What is the threshold there for clinical data? In the U.S., we have the Right to Try Act, and I think the drug just needs to have passed a phase 1 clinical trial. Similar?
Yes. So a little bit similar. Phase 2 is typically what Health Canada looks for. And this is essentially physicians being able to refer clients or patients to the Special Access Program. The things that are interesting about the Special Access Program, people will probably have some knowledge of the Section 56 exemptions that were happening in Canada, which is quite a long process. With the Special Access Program, Health Canada has to respond within 48 hours. So
Wow.
it is a quick turnaround time, and while it's absolutely not final state that we hope for, it's a really, really significant step forward, and I think shows Health Canada's commitment to really moving towards accessibility for these different therapies, and not to move them into a restrictive sort of setting. So it's a really, really exciting time in Canada.
Yeah, it's amazing. The scale at which it seems to be rolling out in Canada with all the amazing work being done in Canada is unbelievable. Really, I'm really, really hopeful.
Yeah, makes both of us.
Yeah. So, you mentioned psilocybin. You were able to grow and extract, grow mushrooms and extract psilocybin from them, which is awesome. Kind of curious about this is a fun one, patents. So obviously there's a company out there, Compass, and they've drawn a lot of heat around their psilocybin patenting. How do you and Numinus really feel about those patents? Like, do you feel like there's a little bit of risk there of them kind of overreaching?
Yeah. Our approach to patents has always been the commitment from the company is to never patent or restrict anything that would move towards restricted access for clients or patients. And if you look at psilocybin, it naturally occurs in nature, and the sort of validity of patenting either the molecule or trying to patent the therapeutic process, I have a high degree of skepticism towards. I think Compass is doing really important research, and I think the last data that they published was very compelling. It showed the necessity for a few other things as well, but I think if you look at the corporate presentations of pretty much any company in the psychedelic space, you typically see this addressable needs slide, and it has these very astronomical numbers, sure, it's great from a market opportunity standpoint, and it's also really scary from a place that we're in from a mental health perspective. And so if all of these different companies agree that this is this massive addressable need or market, then we really shouldn't have to worry about how can we very, very quickly try and control or wrap our hands around something that could potentially restrict access. And what we should be focusing on is that massive addressable need. So, our view on patents, we have IP that's filed around the technology of the formulations, but nothing that restricts or makes things cost prohibitive. Our commitments have been, how can we make things that are more cost effective and safe for people? And I think that needs to be the focus of the space, especially in the very early goings. I think to focusing now on restrictive patents is a little bit ridiculous in my mind.
Hmm. Yeah, and I just really hope it's not going to slow down progress of the whole field, because that's my primary concern. Where we had actually recorded, had our first technical failure in a podcast recording in a long time, and we were recording with this patent attorney, and he had a lot of really interesting feedback. And I'm hoping to do a little bit more work around this, because this is probably one of the more important things to discuss. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I believe
Mm-hmm.
we'll be doing a conference, small online conference next month, and this will be a big topic. What should I patent and what shouldn't I patent? Really basic,
Well,
fundamental questions.
yeah, and I think if you look at maps, for example, I think one of the reasons why it's very exciting and imperative that a group like MAPS is MDMA will probably be the first FDA approved psychedelic, obviously outside of ketamine, and I think it's so important that a not for profit group like MAPS is doing that work, because I think it sets the tone for the sort of just attentionality and accessibility of these different medicines. And again, the focus really needing to be on how much access we can provide for people.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, one of the biggest deals here is like, how are we going to scale this? Before we go there, I'd love to chat about those Compass results, because we were kind of at this Miami conference, and
Mm,
day one vibes were high, day
hmm.
two vibes were low, because it coincided with those results that seemed to correspond with like a lot of companies taking a big hit.
Yeah,
Um, I think that
yeah.
data is really interesting. I didn't really think it was as dire as the rest of everybody seemed to take it, right?
Yeah, if you speak to a lot of, even if you talk to analysts, or if you speak to a lot of people on the sort of research side, I think, and for us, the data was very compelling. I think to remember, this is a phase 2, is strictly dosing protocol, and what the results that they saw were, I think, very compelling.
Hmm.
I think what it really highlighted, and what I think everybody's hoping to see with the phase 3 is, with the inclusion of a strong therapeutic protocol and container. I think you're going to see some really drastic continually impressive numbers. But yeah, from our side, we were very compelled by what was there. Obviously, from a corporate capital market side, the company's valuation had increased significantly going into those results, which I would have preferred not to have seen. I would have preferred to have seen um, the results to come out first, and I think you probably would have seen a different result. But I think people's expectations were extremely high, and I think trying to translate results like that in a digestible way for people is a real challenge, and I think that's one of the issues they ran up against.
One of the biggest concerns that a lot of people were expressing was that it looked like suicidality or suicidal ideation increased, and for me, like my gut reaction, I've been around since studying this field since 2001 or so, and that idea just seems like kind of part of it. Like if you're living authentically and really examining your life, like I think suicidal ideation should come up once in a while. Maybe not like precipitated, like rolling around in it in the mud for a while with that. That's maybe where it's bad, but just the fact that it came up, like maybe that's how I read it in their work. But any reaction to that?
Yeah, I think again, and without getting into sort of the data sides of it, but maybe on a more opinion based thought process, if you think about the notion of a bad trip, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of conversation around that. A bad trip is from my perspective when you have a very strong psychedelic experience without proper container and someone to help move you through that, you can have a very challenging experience. And for most people, and there's metadata around this, typically the more challenging of an experience you have, the potential for an even better outcome. And so I think, these kinds of markers are going to come up in people's experiences where they're being they're looking at some very challenging material. And again, I think points to the real importance of a very strong therapeutic container where someone can say, okay, we've been there, this has come up. How do we unpack this, and how do we look at some of these different parts, which I think is extremely important. So that's what I see there, and I think again I very compelled about what the phase 3 data might show after that sort of strong therapeutic container.
Right on. Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, you reminded me there was this whole topic in there around bad experiences or being uncomfortable or something. I'm like, well, it's part of it too, guys. Come on.
Yep, yep,
It's
exactly.
as beautiful as it can be the opposite. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah. So, have you guys been thinking at all about group containers? I find this a really interesting topic because of scale, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we've been looking at ketamine group ketamine containers, and then going forward with things like MDMA and psilocybin. What are the opportunities for group containers there? Obviously, more research to be done, but I think looking at models that help make it more scalable, help bring some of the costs down, and I think not only group containers for the psychedelic experience, but frankly, group containers and community containers for integration and
Mm.
ongoing support. And I think that's something that's really, really interesting. I think, one of the best examples of a community that is a really, really strong healing community. If you look at AA, for example, there's not a city on the planet I think that you could go to where you don't find an AA community. And while certainly all these communities have their strengths and weaknesses, it really shows that with a really, really strong community, you can really help facilitate a lot of healing. And I think that's one of the things that this sort of resurgence in psychedelic medicine shows is that if you can have a very, very strong community and integration container, you can really apply these different psychedelic experiences and make a significant shift in your life. And I think
Mm.
again, while the psychedelic experience is important, the integration and ongoing support and community is I would argue as important or more so.
Mm. Because you have a bit of a footprint, so it's changing pace a little bit. You have a bit
Hmm.
of a footprint in states and in Canada. So, is there anything that's happening in Canada that isn't happening in the states that we should pay attention to, and maybe vice versa?
Yeah, obviously the special access program is a huge, huge step forward in Canada. The previous Section 56 exemptions. I think one of the things that's really interesting in Canada at the moment is the movement towards and the potential for perhaps a different legal structure with psychedelics. These amendments that you've seen Health Canada make sort of point towards the potential for more of a medical access model for psychedelics, versus sort of the very pharmaceutical clinical trial approach. And obviously Canada was a leader in some of the drug policy change stuff with cannabis, and I think while they're miles apart in terms of approach, I think there's the potential for Canada to move towards a more medical access model for psychedelics, which is really exciting, and I think something that we would be very, very in support of. And then obviously in the US, you've seen the strong decriminalization movement that states have gone through, which is, we believe, a very important movement as well. I think the other thing that you've seen with ketamine in the US is much more, call it liberal use and access of ketamine, which has opened up room for innovation, but also, as I was mentioning earlier, definitely I think some places to be concerned, and I think as an industry we need to be cautious about. I think that those are the two big things that you're seeing at the moment. And then, just to re-highlight the stance that MAPS is in at the moment with MDMA. Psilocybin gets a lot of the airtime at the moment, but MDMA, I encourage everybody to read the results from the MAPS phase 3 work, which is probably I would argue the most astounding clinical data we have on psychedelics with, for treatment resistant PTSD, which, for anybody who doesn't know, treatment resistant PTSD is this is a population of people who have tried every other treatment and have failed. Over 80% of people who went through the MDMA protocol saw a significant reduction in their symptoms, and 67% actually no longer met the PTSD criteria after 3 treatments, which that's a cure for treatment resistant PTSD, which is just like, that's an astounding thing to be able to say.
And further, it was a full year after.
Correct.
Yeah. To make it even better.
Full year after. Yeah. And with that, you actually see the numbers actually go up over time. And I think one of the things that does, and going back to the Compass results, is it really, really highlights the necessity of a really strong therapeutic container. And that's one of the things that MAPS is really, really integrated into their MDMA protocol is it's very heavy on therapy. And they recognize the importance of that. And with that, you've seen really astounding results.
Did you see the Goldman Sachs statement recently? Maybe it was a question they posed. Is curing people a sustainable business model? I was like, what? How can you say that? And it's a twofold question for you. Like, any reaction to that, and like, what's your impression of the word cure being used in this space? Because it's quite contested.
Yeah, I think it's such a mindset shift for people in regards to mental health, right? We become hooked to our diagnoses, right? You get diagnosed as clinically depressed, and you feel like, okay, I'm a depressed person, I'm inherently depressed, and this is going to be something that I'm going to have to manage for the rest of my life. The argument with what we're seeing with psychedelic therapy is you're not inherently suicidal. You're not inherently depressed. There certainly are people, who have, very, very significant mental health challenges like paranoid schizophrenia and things like that could, mean something different. But I think this mindset shift around what if we could actually cure you of these things and getting you back to living a healthier and fuller life. It's just a very big mindset shift for people. But, the thing that we refer back to is like, if you came in for knee surgery and we said, well, we have this thing where we could completely fix your knee, but instead of doing that, here's your Advil and some pain medication. We're not going to fix it. And guess what? Your knee is inherently broken. And that's just the way that it goes. You'd be sort of going like, what are you talking about? I think with psychedelic therapy, it needs to be looked at more so as an intervention. And if you look at a knee surgery, there's preparation, there's the intervention, and then there's ongoing physical therapy and ongoing care to make sure that you don't bang it up again. And I think that's the opportunity that psychedelics present is, yes, curative intent, with a number of these mental health indications. And also, frankly, I think where we move to hopefully is mental wellness, and using these as tools to continue to work on our mental wellness. Everybody goes to the dentist, even if you've got perfect teeth. Most people go to the dentist a couple times a year. Why don't we treat our minds the same way? And I think that's a really exciting potential that we're very hopeful that psychedelics play. Is, yes, absolutely, we need to address these really severe indications and get people support that they need, but also, how do we ensure and how do we continue to provide a platform where people can better themselves and not end up with these indications in the first place.
So this guy, Dr. Dale Bredesen, wrote this book called The End of Alzheimer's, and he coined a great term in there. The term was a cognoscopy. So it's like at a certain age, you get a colonoscopy every year. But, every year when you're older, maybe you should get a cognoscopy. So it's like this kind of a, yeah, more in the organic side with like things like Alzheimer's. But yeah, big moves coming in Alzheimer's research, by the way, everybody. Stay tuned. It's going to be an excellent couple years, I think, for Alzheimer's research. But yeah, like totally, we need to get tuned up once in a while, just like a car, like any kind of machine. Like if we're kind of these interesting mammal machines, like we got to get taken care of once in a while. And MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine can be part of that, I believe. Yeah. So Oregon. Let's talk about Oregon. It's a really interesting situation. It's like confusing. So we just started running a show every other week, actually, called Eyes on Oregon. And I meet up with an attorney named John Dennis, and he's been in all the meetings. He's talked to all the players for the most part. So it's fun to like be totally up to speed. But this looks like it's not going to be a medical situation only. It looks like you can have mushrooms or psilocybin from mushrooms. Yeah, whenever you want, for the most part. I don't know. What's your reactions to it, or how do you like to think about it?
I think it's very exciting to see a state really so positive about psilocybin, and I think it's confusing. I would agree with you, and I think they're still in a process of sort of trying to figure out exactly what it's going to look like. But
exactly, yeah.
I think you could see more states hopefully go that way. And I think as we get more and more educated about psychedelics, I think the thing that I always want to see is just proper education and checks and balances around psychedelics and psychedelic therapy. To someone who might be sort of a passerby in the space, you see all of this positive anecdotal stories about psychedelics or different kinds of therapies, and people are quick to sort of go like, oh, okay, well, if I grab some psilocybin and do it in my living room, am I going to cure my depression? And I think
odds are a lot lower.
odds are a lot lower, and I think there just really needs to be a proper amount of education around how these tools are used, how they're deriving some of these different results that they're seeing, and the right education around that. And obviously we live in a culture where drugs are easy to get your hands on, and I think that just needs to be kept in consideration, and just making sure that there's appropriate education there. And I think I think there's ultimately, hopefully we arrive at a place where, yes, there's the opportunity for self-discovery with psychedelics in a safe way, but also if you're looking at the data, the expectation that that's really, done in a container that's curated by someone with training, who can safely move somebody through some of those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
These are tools, and a hammer can be used to build a house, or a hammer can be used to hit yourself in the hand with. Really comes down to who's using it, and I think that's an important thing to keep in consideration for people.
I like that a lot. Yeah, we really do have to be thoughtful about what are we selling people,
Hmm.
because I think there will be some fraudulent type sales pitches, meaning, you just don't have the data to like back up your claims. Like
Yes.
it's okay to
Yep.
like say some things, but please couch it in like some
Hmm.
caution.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Exactly.
There's,
Well, and I think you see that with ketamine at the moment. There's people just sort of go psychedelics, and then they hear all these stories and they go like, okay, I'm going to rush to go get my ketamine experience. And
mhm.
the clinical data on ketamine, obviously primarily around depression at the moment. There's still a lot of work to be done there, and I think we need to be just cautious, with again how we're marketing, and how we're speaking about these different things, and making sure that expectations are being met with a healthy level of skepticism, and obviously a huge amount of excitement and hope as well.
So, kind of want to jump into the Canadian insurance situation,
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's wildly different from how it operates in the States. I hope everybody knows that by now.
Yeah.
So, what's the story right now around standard mental health treatments?
Hmm.
Maybe even the situation around ketamine assisted psychotherapy, and then like, what's the hope for once psilocybin MDMA come online in Canada?
Yeah, and so in Canada we have universal healthcare system, so we have healthcare coverage for every Canadian. You do see quite a good amount of support for mental health, and therapeutic services, which people get
Hmm.
benefits for. I think one of the things that's interesting about the special access program is there are other drugs and therapies that do get covered, that only flow through the special access program. So there is the potential to start to see sort of the first fully insurance covered, psychedelic experiences with MDMA and psilocybin, which I think present a really exciting opportunity. And I think the argument is, um, if Health Canada is openly agreeing that these therapies need to be accessed, then they should be able to get insurance coverage for them, and they should be able to have them be paid for. And so I think that's something that you could see Canada potentially move first with, and obviously, with that, it's for all Canadians. So it's an exciting opportunity, and I think at the very very least, and your comments around ketamine is this notion of it's two things. It's the drug and then the therapy, and right now we can get some of the therapy covered, so it starts to bring more accessibility into some of those different treatments, which, as we all know, are expensive upfront costs for psychedelic therapy at the moment. And
Hmm.
I think that's an important thing to emphasize. And again, around the mindset shift, for a lot of mental health stuff, we're used to spending $150 on a therapist every other week, or antidepressants, where it's sort of this more nominal amount of money that we're sort of spending on a very frequent basis, but potentially for the rest of our lives, and without real, significant shifting. Whereas, with psychedelic therapy, more of that, as I mentioned, intervention based model, where it's a more significant upfront investment, but the potential to get to living a full and happy life, in potentially, you know, a fairly short time frame, is really the way that people need to sort of look at psychedelic therapy when they're looking at investing into it.
Right, and I think I'm hopeful for insurance companies in the States to catch on eventually, though it is a hard proposition. I think are you okay paying this much money up front, so that you'll minimize your downside downstream with this one client? Because they're working on numbers, right? It's not really always a human equation when it comes to American health insurance.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, the one thing I will say with that, though, if you look at at corporations at the moment who spend huge amounts of money on not only mental health care, but for employees who might be suffering with long term depression or anxiety or addiction, all of these different things, to be able to support their workforce in very short order, and then having them being able to come back to work as their full, capable selves, not some fraction of themselves because they're in this long state of suffering. I think is something that's a very interesting value proposition for companies and insurance providers. So I'm it's going to take some education for sure. But I think when we start to look at, again, things like productivity, happy employees, employee retention, all of those kinds of things, I think that's something that's really needing to be significantly factored in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think where I live, I have a special insurance package just based on the small little region because their suicide rates are so high for some reason.
Mm,
And $0 copay for talk therapy, which blew me away.
mm,
Usually it would be like $20 to $75
right.
for me.
Mm,
If I had insurance.
mm,
Yeah, it's interesting to watch
it
how
is.
it plays out. Now, have you and your team been looking at any kind of data play? Because this is a really fun topic because on one hand, there's so many like people freaking out about data privacy, but what we know is that huge data sets reveal huge amounts of helpful information,
Hmm.
and like
Hmm.
this balance between privacy and like using the data skillfully is like quite the topic.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we talk a lot about. Obviously, patient records and the sort of the data management side of patient records. There's a lot of privacy necessary with that. But I think even, one of the things that I think is really interesting, even looking at the special access program, is here's an opportunity to start getting these therapies into market and um, starting to innovate and ideate and make the therapies hopefully more effective, make them more scalable, all of those kinds of things. Which that data that you talk about is a really really important factor of that. And so I think where we're interested in is the sort of real world clinical data and how can we use that to continue to help provide the best client outcomes for people. And I think there's lots and lots of room for innovation in regards to tools, uh, virtual healthcare, all of those kinds of things to really move this industry forward in a way that's lasting and sustainable.
Have you do you have any interesting observations on virtual reality in this space and how it might be leveraged? It's such a weird but novel topic, right?
It's it on one hand is exciting, and on the other hand it's terrifying for
Right.
for me.
Did you watch Ready
You know,
Player One?
I did see that, and it's sort of I don't know. Part of me is like, man, we've made a lot of movies about this, and they don't typically end super well. But but I think again, I think technology tools. One of the things that's such a big predictor of positive outcomes is the environmental controls around psychedelic therapy, and I think things like virtual tools to help. You even see technology like what WavePaths has, where they're starting to create curated sound experiences that are tailored to the experience that the person is having in their psychedelic experience, to try and make it as personable and tailored for that particular individual. And so I think tools like that are really really exciting. I think it's a slippery slope in terms of VR. And I think one of the things that we've always been concerned about, even just with what we're seeing with things like Zoom and stuff like that, is we now, you see groups that are mailing ketamine to people's houses, and it's like, hey, hop on Zoom with your therapist. Which, I understand where people feel like that might help with accessibility, but it's also really scary. people going through really significant experiences, potentially some of the most profound of their lives, and also the propensity for them to be challenging. And you know, a Zoom screen has its limitations when you're a healthcare provider. If someone needs help, you know, some of those kinds of things are concerning, and I think again um, need to be cautiously approached.
Yeah, I agree. It's nice for therapists to have that kind of access, but yeah, we need to understand the risk factors and how do we really know that client? So like, there's ways to mitigate downsides, right? Like, for instance, doing a couple sessions in person first. um,
Yeah,
at
well,
least, right?
exactly. Getting to know the person. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Agreed.
yeah, but the VR and the tech angles are so fascinating because there's just a lot on top of the current kind of ideal that we could
Hmm.
add in that we haven't
Hmm.
even really thought about
Hmm.
fully because we
Hmm.
still have to do this basic science, right?
Yep, agreed. Agreed. Yeah. It's always you look at the innovation curve of technology. It just moves so much faster than human beings evolution does. And I think we need to remember that when ultimately what we're talking about is treating people. And
Hmm.
we need to not forget that while we sometimes let the cart get a little too far ahead of the horse.
um, so I just joined the board of directors for the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition in Washington D.C., and we're hoping one of my primary objectives there is to um, improve science funding from the federal government in the U.S. for
Hmm.
psychedelics.
Hmm.
But I'm kind of curious if there's anything um, major that you would like to see changed in the United States in terms of like kind of federal drug policy, like perhaps restricting your ability to operate, maybe
Yeah.
uh, unfair expenses.
Yeah. Yeah, I think obviously federal research funding would be huge. There's a lot of research that still needs to be done, and while organizations are continuing to sort of take that on, I think the more open science and work that's done just on a more accessibility sort of focused pathways is really really important. And I think from a drug policy standpoint, as we sort of talked about, is I think we really need to look at what does accessibility with psychedelics look like, and making sure that we're not making them restrictive or funneled into a place where one organization sort of controls the sort of access points for psychedelic therapy. I think those are really really important. And then obviously the conversation around what does necessary registration or what does the sort of necessary medical oversight need to look like for psychedelic therapy. One of the things we ran into in Canada for a little while, which is now shifting, in order to administer ketamine, you at one point in time had to be what's called a non-accredited hospital facility, which is a multi-million dollar kind of infrastructure build out, which just makes it completely um, inaccessible for people financially. So and frankly a lot of unnecessary overhead. So I think when we're looking at those kinds of things, that's what we need to take into consideration. And again, even the sort of who are we approving to do psychedelic therapy? A nurse practitioner or someone with a little bit less expensive hourly billing rates than a physician or something like that. I think those are some of the things that need to be looked at, to try and keep the costs down, while obviously ensuring a high level of safety and efficacy for clients.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, this idea of psychotherapy being very different from the type of work we're doing in psychedelic sessions, I think needs to be expanded upon.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, have you all discussed that? It sounds like you were kind of hinting at it a little bit.
Yep.
Like, is this a different model? I think the answer is yes. But
Yeah.
where are you guys with that?
Yeah, I think, just on that sort of training thread as well, I think one of the things that we're all sort of waiting to see is what is the necessary training going to need to be, and what are the sort of costs going to be associated with that. But to answer, the short answer to your question is yes. I think there's definitely a lot of room for some shifting of things. And again, frankly, if you look at the types of therapies coupled with psychedelic therapy that are effective, as we were talking about, somatic therapy, things like that,
Hmm.
are a little different than your just sort of psychotherapy sort of modalities.
Right on. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So I think we should wrap here. But is there anything else you might maybe wanted to mention that we didn't get into?
No, I think really, really appreciate the time, and as we talked about, I always encourage everybody to really do a lot of education work and understanding of sort of the different ways in which psychedelics are worked with. And when you're looking at
Hmm.
the research, I really encourage people to understand just how these therapies are being used, and how these medicines are being used. And I think if we can continue to focus on education and full disclosure, I think we'll all be much better for it, and we can better understand how to support this space, which frankly is needed now, arguably more than ever before. So
Right on. Well, Peyton, really appreciate you coming on. I hope we can do it again. And
likewise,
really grateful for you being in the space. So more soon. And thanks a ton.
appreciate it. Thanks so much.